This Extreme Bull Mini, we've made some great modifications on it. In this particular case, we spread the batteries 4mm on each side. That modification involved spacing the top of the battery, replacing the middle support block that sits here with a new designed version, as well as an internal spacer that runs down the whole side here and mounts onto the two suspension pins. Other requirements were to get the spacing for the headlight, spacing for the handlebars, spacing for the rear light, which hasn't been done, and spacing for the mudguard that you can't really see in there. Before, the batteries used to sit really tight here, and this plate here used to not sit underneath the batteries. We can see here we have plenty of space, which is crazy considering. So I'm very pleased with how this turned out, and now let's get to the video of what we did. Right, so this is the clearances for the battery packs and the valve. There's just no clearance here to the motor, and it's the same on the other side. So I want to see if I can space these batteries out. But this Extreme Bull Mini is pretty interesting. The fork style suspension is pretty cool. And then we have the slider plate, which sits through these bottom holes and it slides up and down. And this is bolted to the battery case. The battery case is a one-piece unit, very similar to a Lynx. Tolerances are really tight and you get frame flex and rubbing. This part here, which the pedal hanger mounts to, sits in here. Mount down here. Oh, it's pretty heavy. I'm going to weigh that. The 2 packs of cells exactly the same as the Master. It's mounted here, here and here. We just add a 3mm spacer across here, a 3mm spacer square here. Remove this plate and add a 3mm spacer behind it so it pulls that out. And then this we leave the same. And then this bracket here, we add a 3mm spacer that sits behind. So this keeps it in the same position while pushing everything out. I think that will work. Absolutely see frame flex and where your tire's been rubbing in the suspension zone. This is just your motor when you get dirt in there. Can absolutely see the same, and it's always on the front side where the frame is flexing, not at the rear, and it's just because there's no clearance. As the battery packs mount on the middle section, which is actually this piece, but I've 3D printed a custom one, and then down the bottom to prevent the battery tilting up. This does a lot of the work, however this also takes a lot of stress off this. But having these pins sit inside the battery track and they're fixed here. However, the whole mechanism slides like this. Extreme Bull Mini is a motor cable. They just designed it really quick and cheap with a straight run. It needs a bridge, so you don't have to trim your wide tires because it can be no wider than. Again with the mudguard stand housing, there's just no clearance for a tire. This tire has been shaved and there's just nothing. We got here this part, and this part, which is the motor cable, move. And then this is stationary. So this cannot attach to this, but this can attach to this. And what I need to do is I need to come up to here and then I need to hump up. So it comes a bit higher and then comes across and then goes down. Especially for the motor cable, because there's no clearance for the tire. So this is the component that sits like that, and I need to lift this up. So we can leave the 2 bolts at the bottom in their existing location because that works out great. And then we just add a 10mm spacer and a bolt, and then that gives us all the clearance under here that we need. We've got tons of clearance. Shouldn't scrape on here, it looks good. And then we do the same for the motor side. We just use a different screw and 10mm spacer. Let's put the motor cable back. Looking from the front view, we can see our 2 10mm spacers, so now we've got a lot of tire gap. This Extreme Bull Because we've widened it 3 mils on each side, we've now got a 6mm gap down the middle. Had to cut it and then put a bar in it to support it. It is super strong, ultra rigid. Now we're going to do this top one to do the same to accommodate the 6mm gap. This is the back bar that stands vertical because it's got the grooves in it. It has a plate here, so I'm just going to file that smooth and then cut it straight through and add a block to bolt them together essentially. Figure out that gap later. Great. We've got gap spacer on all three, and considering this is an off-the-shelf part, your handle, it determines the width of the machine. I would not be surprised if this machine is built around the handle. We're waiting for the new tire to come. We've made a new piece here. So this is a consistent piece. What this piece replaces the top mount, which is just here. This part here becomes thinner. We take 3mm off it, and then the bottom plate that sits down the bottom, that sits this way here, is all turned into like one continuous piece now. We can see the one continuous piece sitting on here. There's a little bit of movement because I haven't done these bolts up tight. What I will do is I'll put the pedal hanger on and then tighten everything up and make sure everything sits in alignment, but there is a bit of a tolerance allowance. Now that we got the pedal hanger on and everything's tightened up, something to note is I did add longer bolts on all the pedal hangers, so it does accommodate for the extra 3mm plate, and this plate is sitting in alignment. It does lift up, but the pressure will hold that down when it's installed. We've got our new block printed. This block is slightly thinner at 11mm because there's that whole plate that sits over the top. So let's shift across these heat sets. So we've got the side down with our 3mm spacer. I'm thinking about increasing this a little bit, right? Because as we come down and have a look, so the battery pack's here, suspension sliders here, those 10mm spacers just there. At the moment I've got a 3mm gap on the batteries, and that's the narrowest point, and we can see we've got a pretty good gap between the tire. This tire's been shaved, so it's not a good representation, but what I'm thinking of is just lifting these batteries a little bit, so probably like 1.5 mil. So if it's 3 now, make it 4.5, just so when I have a ruler in here I can lift this up until it hits the suspension unit. Still waiting for the new tire to come, and this valve has been tied down, and we've moved these spacers, so we've got a lot of clearance in there now. So when we get this new tire, I'm going to take off the valve holder downer. We've changed the spacer to 4mm to 10mm, and then on the battery pack we got the full piece that's 4mm, so we'll put that on and see what it looks like. Got the pack here sitting temporarily. I've bolted it down at the top. There's nothing here, there's nothing in the middle going to that platform, but the bottom, what I'm noticing is the pins won't go in unless I slightly lift up the pack, and we might be able to just see there is a slight misalignment, but essentially when I go to put the pin in, it gets caught unless I lift it up a fraction, and then it'll go in. So, and I can tell that when I pull it out, it drops down. So that means this block here needs to be raised up a couple of mil. But either way, if I put the 2 pins in, I can check what the valve and the battery clearances look like. For how the battery pack is running in regards to how it sits in alignment with the pole, there's a good, say, 2mm, and that's even with the 4mm spacer. I don't really want to make the unit that much wider. If we have a look here in regards to the valve and the battery box, I think we got enough clearance to do what we want. Something I just noted with installing the side barrier that sits about here. with my original piece. The gap that sits there is too great, so we've got the wider model. So we put this in. So now when that sits in there and we drop in the side piece, we've got a better alignment of the padding to the foam sitting. At the same time, I changed these screws for smaller ones so they don't protrude all the way through, because these cutouts are really weird and they interfere with the spacer block. I haven't re-added these support braces yet. They just help with a bit of the compression of the battery when you apply too much force. Because we've pulled it out, we've got to figure out how we're going to do this. I think I'm just going to plate this up and then put this back, but low priority.